Okay, class, this week in science class, we're gonna do a lab. Oh no. Oh, please no. Please make the lab report optional. Please make the lab report optional! I've been meaning to get my thoughts out on the scientific method for a while now. When I first learned about the scientific method, I didn't quite internalize just how important it was. To me, it was always just that annoying format we had to follow in writing lab reports. Maybe I thought it was like that so it looked professional, but other than that, I didn't really understand why it was the way it was. I think the reason for this had to do with me and many of my other classmates being stuck in the context of school lab reports, where in everyone's heads, we're all concerned about what grade we would get after we were done, rather than questioning the purpose of why we were doing it. But in recent years, due to the amount of people I've met and seen who don't understand what it is or why it exists, and also the ever-increasing amount of misinformation in the world via the internet, I thought it was about time I publicly share my 2 cents on the topic. First of all, what actually is the scientific method? Is it experiments? Is it that annoying format you have to write lab reports in? Maybe it's the part of the roberr video where he cuts to talking about a bunch of lame nerd stuff.
But before we get to swimming in sand, let's talk about the science behind a fluidized bed. Don't click away if you think science is boring.
And for those of you who aren't well rehearsed in the realm of science, it's not just the nerd part of the roberr video. It's the whole roberr video. If you remember learning about it in school, you were probably told, whenever you had to do a lab report, to do things in this order, or at least something similar, and that this was the scientific method. Question: what are you trying to figure out? Hypothesis: what do you think will happen? Procedure: how will you test your question? So like, experiments. Analysis: this one has a funny word in it. Conclusion: what have you learned from doing all this? Yada yada yada. Error analysis, controlled variables, boring, 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 and why? Why? Why does it have to be done in this way? I don't know if it was just me and I didn't listen in class. Maybe I'm just dumb, or maybe my teachers didn't go over it. Whatever it was, for the longest time, I thought the scientific method was a load of donkey doo-doo and would physically cringe at the notice that I had to write a research paper. I mean, I still do, but that's besides the point. So if you're anything like me, you're probably wanting to know why I think it's so important now. So even if you already know what it is and all, I'm gonna share my thoughts on why I think it's so important, because it's my video and not yours. You've all been there. You and your friend are having an argument, and you guys can't agree on who you think is right, and you're convinced that you are right. Must suck being you because all your other friends believe the myth propagated through that slimy, deceptive, nim-witted mouth of your friend, and you can't find a way to convince your other friend that it's a lie. No matter what you do, even if you bring evidence to the table, even if you try everything in your power to convince them, it just seems like they want to believe what they want to believe. Now, instead of a small group of friends, think the entire world. You start to see the problem? It's because there's no system. People base their beliefs on who has the most charm and cunning persuasion skills, or sometimes just arbitrarily, rather than who's actually right. And how would we know who's right and wrong anyway? What kind of backwards world would we live in if we didn't have a rigorous, clearly defined way of seeing who is right and who is wrong? Where everyone just believes what they want to believe, and no one can agree on anything. What kind of world would that be? It'd be a flat one. I see them everywhere. On my YouTube recommended feed, well, that's pretty much it. But still, why do people like this exist in such high quantities enough to have their own flat earth conferences and these large online communities?
1, 2, 3, we're not crazy!
I mean, seriously, who pays for these gatherings? It perplexes me how someone like this can even exist. Look, I'm sure many of them are really great people and all, if you were to get to know one of them, but in terms of their knowledge on the shape of the earth, I'd probably think that the education system didn't do a good job at teaching them the concept of the scientific method system. It must have went over their heads, just like it did with me those many years ago. But how exactly does the scientific method prevent people from believing in wild ideas like a flat earth? It does this through the requirement of a repeatable experiment. And this is one of the things the scientific method does that makes it so great. The reason we need to do experiments at all is to prevent wild claims like Antarctica being a giant ice wall and citing sources like the Bible as scientific fact. I doubt any flat earth believer has actually gone out and tested the ice wall claim using proper scientific methodologies, like actually going there and proving their claim. Scientists, on the other hand, actually test the questions they have in order to find out answers. This sounds really obvious at first, but think about it. Seriously, take a moment to think about it. Think about all the myths you've been told throughout your life, like being told that sleeping with your phone under your pillow makes you dumb, or that humans only use 10% of our brains. How do you think those myths have lived on for so long? Without people actually testing these, I guess people just tend to believe wacky things. I mean, some flat earthers do actually perform experiments though, but they aren't very specific, rigorous, or actually prove what they're trying to prove. Which immediately, no, this is the last part. Which leads me to the next part, peer review. In 1998, Andrew Wakefield, who was once a practicing physician, that means he used to be a doctor, published what is known now as one of the most controversial scientific research papers ever to be published. Some of you may have already heard of it. As far as my knowledge goes, this infamous paper was the first one to make the connection between vaccines and autism. This was the guy. He used to be a doctor, for goodness sakes. He is one of the big reasons we still have kids not getting vaccinated in anti-vax rallies across the world. But wait, he did do everything very scientifically, besides fabricating some of his data. But he did do the hypothesis and experiments and everything. How does the scientific method stop false papers like this one from existing? And this is where peer review comes in. It's such a simple concept. You get your paper checked over by other people in your field. This is such an obvious thing to do, but you'd be surprised at how effective it is at separating pseudosciences from the truth. And after other doctors peer-reviewed Wakefield's paper and saw its fraudulence, Wakefield soon after lost his medical license and the ability to practice medicine due to the sheer amount of fear it caused within people getting their kids vaccinated. Look, Wakefield, flat earthers, I hear ya. You guys just want to know the truth, I hope. And you guys believe these things you think are true, just like everyone else believes things we think are true too. But how is anyone supposed to know what is right or wrong and what is real from fake if we have no system to ask and test these claims and questions? This is why I'm so grateful to live in a world with the scientific method, because the scientific method is that system. Everyone has questions. It's a part of our innate human curiosity, and I believe that creating repeatable tests to be testing those questions with, and other people being able to check and see if there are any problems with your tests or conclusions, is at the heart of the scientific method. When I think of the word science, I don't think of a bunch of nerds in a lab making rockets and doing math. Well, I mean, sometimes I do. But the point is, when I think of science, the scientific method is what I think of. It's the system that our world runs on in order to separate what we know is real from what we know is false. To separate people saying what they want to say from people who will actually go out and legitimately test it and publish research papers and get that retested and checked over by others. It's the closest thing we can get to confidently knowing anything in the messy, chaotic, and confusing universe we live in. So Francis Bacon, Galileo, thank you. Because the scientific method, to me, that's what science is. And that's why it matters a lot to me.